Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Derek Miller. I'm the president and CEO of the Salt Lake Chamber. And on behalf of the Chamber, and especially the Chamber's Diversity Council, I'm excited to welcome you to the webinar today, of course, in celebration of Pride Month here in Utah and across the country. We recognize our Chamber Chair this year, Craig Wagstaff of Dominion Energy, and we're grateful to Craig for making diversity and inclusion his chair's priority this past year. Also grateful to our members who have elevated these important issues in their own individual businesses. Today, we're excited to have the opportunity to look back on Utah's historic and celebrated legislation that legally recognized the rights of members of the LGBT community in the workplace, in housing, as well as other protections of religious liberty and belief in these same spheres. This was not an easy feat. I'm sure the panelists will each tell you that. We're pleased to have many of the individuals who worked in the public and behind the scenes to make this history happen here in Utah. Our moderator today will be Jacey Skinner. Jacey currently serves as the general counsel for the Salt Lake Chamber, and she was also the former general counsel to Governor Herbert, and in that role worked very closely with the governor and the legislature to make this law a reality. So Jacey, I will turn it over to you to introduce our panel and to get us started today.
Thank you so much, Derek. And thank you to all of you for being here with us today, and particularly to our panelists. And before I introduce our panelists, I do want to acknowledge, as Derek mentioned, that this feat of passing this piece of legislation was not something that was done without a lot of help from a lot of individuals. And while those who are here with us today played very key and integral roles, there were a number of people who really, without their help, this couldn't have happened. And we'll mention them throughout this webinar, but I just want to acknowledge just the tremendous effort by so many people in the community to make this fantastic effort occur. I'm really excited today that we have with us four really fantastic participants in this legislation who have some really incredible stories of behind the scenes work and incidents that occurred to help make this occur. First, we have with us former Governor Gary Herbert. We all know Governor Herbert. We're very grateful to all he's done for the state. He served as Utah's 17th governor and served for over 11 years in that role. This piece of legislation is one of the key accomplishments of his administration, and we're really excited to have him with us here today. We also have with us President Stewart Adams, who was not president of the Senate at the time of this legislation, but was in leadership and took this issue on, which was a major feat, and was able to accomplish this, and now serves as president of the Senate. We're very grateful for President Adams' leadership on in this area and so many others. We also have with us Troy Williams, who is the Executive Director of Equality Utah. He has served in that role since 2014, a year before this piece of legislation came to be, and helped navigate this. And Professor Cliff Rosky, who teaches at the University of Utah Law School, he is a recognized expert in so many legal fields. I can't even list them all, Cliff, to go through this, but really worked behind the scenes on this bill to make sure that we got the language right and negotiated with so many parties. So thrilled to have all of you here today. Thank you for being here with us. And to begin, I actually want to turn it over to Cliff. And if you wouldn't mind giving us a little bit of a background about why this particular bill was important at the time, what was going on in the country, what was going on in the state, and really why this piece of legislation mattered so much.
Sure, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm happy to speak to that. So in 2015, when this bill became law, we were in a kind of an unusual situation in Utah because same-sex couples had recently won the right to marry in federal court, but it was still perfectly legal to fire a person because they were LGBT in the workplace or to evict them from their home. So as we often said, you could get, married on a Saturday and fired on a Monday for getting married. So it was a very strange legal landscape. This was, of course, before the Supreme Court held that in all 50 states, discrimination in employment against LGBT people is illegal. So this was that decision was still years off. And indeed, the Supreme Court had not granted marriage equality in all 50 states yet. 21 states had protected LGBT people from discrimination in employment and housing at the time, and 29 states had not. And there's a lot of different ways to think about when the story starts. Of course, you could start it at any point, but I think the most relevant point is actually, oddly by coincidence, when I moved here in 2008, just because it was that summer when the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints jumped into the campaign to pass Proposition 8 in California. Same-sex couples had won the right to marry in California, and Prop 8, removed that right. And after the church announced its involvement in the campaign, there was, for the first time, some pushback on that, and the church started to issue statements saying, we're not anti-gay. We have a traditional definition of marriage, but we support employment and housing protections that already exist for LGBT people in California. That was a very important statement. When I read it, my jaw dropped. I thought, oh, this is because that law didn't exist in Utah, and now the church had articulated support. And I'll be honest, Equality Utah, I was working with them then, and Equality Utah's first reaction to that was not their best reaction, let's say. The first reaction was, oh, this is hypocrisy. And maybe because I was coming from out of town, I had a different perspective, which was, listen, if Equality Utah and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints agree on important rights for LGBT people, this is a good thing, and we need to let the world know. So we launched the Common Ground Initiative and just really focused on an appeal to common values. And the philosophy was, if we can agree on something, then let's get it done now, and let's put off our disagreements for later. And that was very much, and remains, the opposite of the philosophy in Washington, D.C. right now, which is that we can't agree on anything until we agree on everything. And so we flipped that on its head and got to work. And that's when essentially secret meetings between church leaders and LGBT leaders began occurring on a kind of neutral ground in which people could share their stories. And I think that's an important part of this, that there was an attempt to bridge differences by telling our stories and listening to each other deeply. I wasn't in those meetings, but those were pivotal in getting this started. And that was in 2008. It took 7 years.
So Troy, I want to turn to you now. I mean, it said that Cliff just mentioned this had taken 7 years to come to this point. I had been working in state government for all of that time, and I don't remember a lot of these attempts coming forward with some of these discussions. What changed in those 7 years? What was it about this year that made it different? What was it that made this year the year you were?
Yeah, so many people working on this issue together. And one of the first things that we did at Equality Utah is we started, as part of this Common Ground initiative, is we went from city to city, and we first went to Salt Lake City. I want to say this is 2010. And we passed a municipal non-discrimination ordinance. And it was a significant moment because, and you got to remember that, like, the culture wars are raging at this point, and it's very much an us versus them dynamic. And here in the state, it was LGBT versus LDS. And there was protests and marches and rallies. And so there was a lot of acrimony in the air. It was tense. And that's where I was at that time. They didn't let me into the secret meetings back in the day because I was a little bit more of a rabble rouser back then. But so we actually went to the city and under Mayor Ralph Becker, and the church stepped forward and actually endorsed the non-discrimination ordinance. And from that moment, this was a huge moment because we've been fighting so much. And after Proposition 8, we were just at each other, and then all of a sudden there was a break, and we came together in a moment of agreement. It was unprecedented. It made nationwide news. And the Salt Lake City Council would have passed the ordinance anyway, But having the church there at our side was a major step forward. And then we began to pass them in West Valley next, Park City, Logan, all across the state. We started passing municipal ordinances, but it provided us the opportunity to go before city councils and just share the stories. I'll tell you, the very first boyfriend I ever had when I came out, he took me to his company Christmas party. It was the first time really that he came out to his manager and his team, and he was fired 2 days later. So this was something that had like this, I mean, that kind of rocked me because I was just kind of newly out. This is like, over 2 decades ago. I was newly out of the closet, and it scared me. And I thought, is this my future? If I'm authentic in my life, our opportunity is going to be blocked. Am I going to be prevented from moving forward? And so I was scared to kind of come out. So that's why I kind of became an activist. So, but as we began to tell these stories in city councils all across the state, hearts began to move. And we had, I believe Senator McCoy was the first person to introduce it, later carried by Ben McAdams. And then we got this crazy idea, like, well, we thought maybe we should see what happens if you get a Republican to run the bill. And Senator Urquhart, this gun-toting, Texas-born, conservative from St. George area, he took up the legislation at the time, and which was unprecedented that a Republican would do that. And then finally, when we got to 2015. We had spent so much time sharing our stories that the church and the legislature, President Adams, Governor Herbert, were all together, and we're like, okay, let's do this.
Thank you, Troy. So speaking of which, so to President Adams, kind of given the history of this and some of the different attempts, what made you decide to take on what even from the beginning really was a kind of an uphill climb? What made you decide to take this on?
I think each of our paths are a little bit different. It's kind of nice to have this reunion, by the way. It's nice to be back together. We spent a lot of time together in 2015, but for me, this actually started back in 2004. And I have deep-seated religious beliefs, and I believe marriage is between a man and a woman. And because of that, I stood lock-armed with very conservative legislators in 2004 and put in place our constitutional amendment that defined marriage between a man and a woman. And back then I thought we'd done what we needed to do. We'd pretty much locked the doors, and we'd done what we thought was right. And that definition, and quite honestly, it didn't pale. I didn't pay a lot of attention to it, even though there were so many other things going on. And then something happened in 2013, and Utah has one of the shortest legislative sessions in the entire country, and it's 45 days. We all know it starts in January, ends in March. But in December of 2013, something happened that wasn't on my radar screen, and Judge Robert Shelby, the 10th Circuit Court, basically overturned that constitutional amendment, and it caused an absolute explosion in Utah. And Troy and the LGBTQ community, I think they felt vindicated. They felt like they'd accomplished something that they fought so hard for, as you've listened to, and they wanted us to pass legislation yesterday. And those that weren't quite bought in, they actually thought, and I remember it very well, that there were constituents that I had that wanted us to secede from the union, because how could a judge overrule the will of the people? And I'll tell you, it was anything but togetherness. It was quite polarized. And in fact, we started the legislative session, and we met as legislative leadership, and we said we aren't going to hear any legislation dealing with religious liberties or anti-discrimination or those type of things. And that was not very popular either, because we were still in the course of going through a legal case, and we hadn't yet gone through the appeal. And Troy, you remember that people, the LGBT community, weren't happy. They blocked a committee room. They got thrown in jail, and all the history of that. And
I
it
may have been in jail.
yeah,
locked
it might
in
have
the
been. I
door.
didn't want to go there, but
Yeah,
you
it
know,
may have been me. This was before I was at Equality Utah. I just want to say that I was
that's
a
a
known
fact.
agent.
Something 13. I don't know what you were nicknamed, but it was a mess. It was a mess in Utah. Okay, and in June of 2014, the courts upheld Judge Shelby's ruling, and then in October, the Supreme Court denied cert, and I'm learning those terms now, but basically they said they weren't going to hear it. And so the Supreme Court said that at that point in time, even though later they did, they weren't going to hit it. So in October of 2014, we started marrying gay couples in Utah. And again, there was a lot of, it was not pleasant. And we started the legislative session, and quite frankly, I believed it was going to be, anything but agreeable. It was going to be quite contentious. We had a lot of legislation being put forward that was going to push back on the judge's decision. And of course, we had the anti-discrimination legislation of Senator Urquhart, and it was going to probably be unmanageable. So you asked me why I got involved. Well, on the second day of the session, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I think 4 apostles stepped forward and said, we need to compromise. We need to be able to find a way to grant, they called it fairness for all. And these words are easy to say, but they're almost impossible to legislate in a 45-day session. But we need to find a way to take care of the rights of everyone. And man, those were easy words to articulate. But I want to tell you, anytime you're dealing with the law, it felt impossible to actually put into legislation. And again, a great work by the people that are here, and a colleague, Senator Urquhart and Brad D and others. But that's how I got involved. Now we can go into more detail, but not something I planned on doing, but I felt like I was a little boy who came to the swimming pool, and he was drowning. The guy pulled him out, and as he revived the little boy, he said, how'd you come to fall in? The little boy said, I didn't come to fall in, I came to look, and I fell in. And I think I kind of fell into this one.
Well, we're all glad that you did, President Adams. So, Governor, I want to turn to you here for a minute. It was your door that people were protesting in front of, and your name that was often used in a lot of, that was part of these lawsuits and other things. As these discussions were taking place, what was your initial reaction? As you heard that there were conversations about religious liberty legislation that may come forward, discrimination legislation that may come forward. What was your approach at that point?
Well, thank you very much. Again, I appreciate the Chamber of Commerce bringing this together to kind of learn from our history, and hopefully it'll help us as we go forward in making good decisions for other important issues. Certainly the idea of civil rights for all people, and certainly those in the gay community, as well as religious rights, which churches want to protect and people of faith want to be able to enjoy, sometimes seem to be at odds with each other. And that seemed to be the problem here for a lot of reasons. And it's kind of an evolution. You've already heard people talk about, go back to 2004 and Amendment A, or whatever the amendment was at the time. But and I know that I was linked with Derek Kitchen in a lawsuit against Kitchen versus Herbert on the marriage issue. And again, making sure that people understand that the opposition that I had was not about people associating together in whatever form or fashion they want to do, but that marriage is defined by states. That's been a historical part of that law. And so our defense of that law was because of states having the right to define marriage, which has always been historically correct. That being said, I think all of us, probably coming from different perspectives, as President Adams has said, sense that the timing is now. The timing is right. We have kind of this growing consensus that there's a better way to do things, and we need to have some legislation that kind of compels us to do the right thing. And hence we ended up having Senate Bill 296 that came about. I counsel with a lot of people I have confidence and trust in, and how can we make this happen? And the concern I have was we'd have one bill that was going to come forth protecting religious rights as they saw them to be. We'd have another bill coming forward that was going to protect civil rights of the LGBTQ community and their advocacy, and they may never be exactly together. And so I told the advocates that as governor of Utah, if you come with a single bill, I will veto it. We need to find something that's going to be equitable, that's going to be fair for both sides of the equation. And I believe that could only happen if we had one piece of legislation where people would work together, have dialogue and understanding, and come up with something, even if it required some compromise, which it did, and come up with something we can all say, you know, that's pretty good. May not be perfect, but that's a step in the right direction. And because of that, although it took us the whole session to kind of get everybody on board, and you know for sure, Jacey, you're right in the middle of the fray there, trying to get the wording right so that both sides could feel good about it. But we came up with something that was really remarkable, and a piece of legislation that had national attention, and it received national attention because, one, we're a very red state, very conservative. Two, we are a very religious-oriented state. And I had calls from governors and people throughout the nation saying, how did you do that in Utah? Because we can't seem to be doing it in our states. And we want to know what it is about Utah that's allowed this to happen. And we came up with this great piece of legislation, and really a day that we all, I think, look back on with some fondness and say, you know what? We came together. We found a way to find a solution to the problem and keep both sides of that equation happy and comfortable with the outcome. And so good work by all that was involved in there. And again, it's one of our, I think, our proudest moments.
We're going to talk about kind of the end, right, and some of the great things that have come out of that. But as you just mentioned, Governor, this took a whole session working through to get right. And President Adams, I know you spent probably more hours than you wanted to huddled in your office, debating and negotiating over specific words.
Yeah.
And there were lots of people who had very strong opinions about how things needed to be balanced and how they needed to be approached. I want to open this up to the group, and maybe we can start with you, Troy. Just what were some of the biggest obstacles that you faced, either with your own constituencies or you're trying to make this happen? What were some of the biggest obstacles that you faced?
Well, I was brand new in this role as executive director, and like we said, I built a career out of being an activist, and it's very different being an activist than actually, trying to sit down and actually craft legislation and bring people together. For me, the issue was really building trust with everybody. I didn't know Governor Herbert, I didn't know President Adams at the time. And so it was really a leap of faith in a lot of ways. And our community was suspicious. I think both sides are suspicious of each other. What do we really want? And what's really the agenda here? Can we truly find common ground? And I was so frightened during the whole process that I would screw up royally and it would all fall apart, that I might say something wrong in the press, or I might do something, or I might, disappoint or fail the community that I love so much. So those were some of the fears that I had. And there were moments when things were tense, when they were heated. When we, I remember President Adams and I I don't even remember the details anymore, but I remember us having a scuffle at one point about it. But what I really took from the whole experience, where I'm so grateful, especially with Governor Herbert and President Adams, whenever things got tough, whenever, things were playing out in the media, or whenever there was anger, they never closed the doors on us. They always kept the doors open so that we could work out our issues, and we never turned away from each other in the process. No matter how difficult it got, we always sort of leaned into each other, and consequently, we're able to sort of solve and get through the roadblocks.
President Adams, what about you? What were some of the bigger obstacles that you faced?
Well, you mentioned the session, and so the governor. We always say in Utah, we have that 45-day session, but that includes the weekends. And this is a session I learned that we have 33 working days. And we used weekends, working days, and everything else, but it almost seemed impossible to be able to accomplish that what everybody's talked about here. And it is, in my opinion, somewhat of a miracle. And one of the miraculous things that happened, in my opinion, is we had to, perhaps for me, had to have a different mindset. And the courts do a lot of good work. And obviously, you know, we all respect the three branches of government and the legal branch, but they're really not the entity that should be setting policy. And many times we pass legislation like we did back in 2004, defining marriage between a man and a woman, and we throw it in front of the courts. And really, we shouldn't be doing that, because when the courts rule like they did in this case, they simply rule up or down. They have no ability to finesse the process. And I think that's what we need to continue to remember, is that the legislature, in my mind, and these are hard issues, one, some that, like I told you before, it's not something I wanted to pick up, but I kind of ended up picking up. But many times we push these hard issues to the side because we don't want to deal with them. And when we do that, the courts rule. And the legislature, if you look back to 296, 297, we did a much better job picking this up, finding the balance between the two sides than any court could do. So one of the obstacles, when you look at it, is getting people to have a mindset that they have to pick up these issues, and the legislature is the spot to do it through that public process and through the negotiations and compromise that happen. And then the other thing that I would say that is really important to try to take down some of these obstacles is I do have deep-seated religious beliefs, and I believe that marriage is between a man and a woman, and I would never give up those beliefs. And we call it the Utah Compromise. Fairness for all is probably a better word, but compromise is in a very good term, because we didn't give up any religious beliefs, nor did the LGBTQ community give up any of their beliefs. And if you got to protect everyone's core values, and that's what we do in America. And if you can keep focused and not worry about all of the details, but try to stay focused on making sure that you protect, and that's what we did here. We gave each other additional protections that we didn't have. And not all that we wanted. We all wanted more in our own particular focus. But if we actually protect everyone, what happens is, and Troy said it very well, trust, is you begin to trust one another. And as that trust happens, then I think something that happens, which I think is the miraculous thing, is when you can actually advocate for someone that you don't agree with to protect their rights, man, that's a different world. And I think that's probably the spot we got to on this.
Governor, we're going to bring that to you.
Yeah, let me just echo what's been said and amplify just a little bit. Troy talks about trust. And that really is an important aspect of negotiation. If you don't trust the opposition, it's hard to work in good faith. And finding people who are willing to work in good faith and a willingness to actually help solve the problem is somewhat rare. I mean, look at Washington, D.C. now. It's all us versus them. That's a kind of a macro look at dysfunctional politics. But in Utah, we came, again, I said the timing was right. I think people have said we can do better. What we have now is not as good as we can be. And with the leadership of President Adams and the legislature and other advocates on both sides of this issue, they were able to sit down and start talking about common ground areas and come together. Again, it would have been nice, if we would just work together naturally, but we do seem to see this as us and them. Them's got to be the enemy, because I'm on a different side of the issue. And so, again, one of the things that helped us to come together, I think, as subtle it may be, was me saying, if you come with one single piece of legislation, I'll veto it. Whether it's for the religious rights protection, I'll veto it. If it's just for gay rights protection, I'll veto it. So let's work together. We were forced to work together. That allowed us to have better dialogue, be intellectually honest, understand and appreciate the other points of view that are out there, and come together for a common piece of legislation, which really became a model for the country. I mean, that's remarkable when you think about how little old Utah here, that other governors and other states are saying, gosh, how did you do it? Send me a copy of that. We want to see your Senate Bill 296. And I went to meeting after meeting with the National Governors Association, and that was a very common thing in the hallway to say, hey, Governor, could you send me that piece of legislation? Tell me how you did it in Utah. because we're facing the same challenge in our state. It looks like you were able to do it correctly. And we did. And so dealing in good faith, working together, listening and understanding, I think helped us to arrive at a good place. And credit the legislature and the advocacy groups that grasp that and says, hey, yeah, we may not get the whole loaf. We're going to get most of the loaf. And that happened. And everybody said, you know what, we've done a good thing. And we did. We did a really good thing there back in was it 2015?
Thank you, Governor. We're hearing a lot about just, I mean, some of the major obstacles being just ability to trust one another and work together to reach a solution. Cliff, anything you want to add as you were doing a lot of the tough legal negotiations and focused on the actual language of a lot of this? What were some of the biggest obstacles or sticking points that you encountered?
It's so interesting to hear the governor talk about, this is not going to be a one-sided bill, right? That everything has to be in the same bill, because I still remember the moment where I was presented with the first version of the bill in a very small room with a lot of people I had not met before. And
well, that was my office.
and I looked at it, and I had seen the church's press conference. I had heard the governor's statements, and I knew that we were going to try to pull off something that had never been done before, and that would require patience and creativity, and really a willingness to just put aside everything that we thought we knew, all of our assumptions about what was possible. But I looked at that bill and my lawyer brain said, wow, the distance between the two parties is vast. But my mouth did not say that, because I was thinking about the framework, and I said, we're so close. We're so close. We just need to take one big step, and then we can start this process. And the big step was, it's sort of the flip side of the governor's point. The first draft was protections for LGBTQ people only, right? That with their own exemptions and their own rules. And I said, my client is Equality Utah, and so it's whatever we get, it's got to be equal. And that was a huge, just a leap of faith. I mean, there was a lot of space, but I had a feeling that if we could take that step together, then the space would get narrower. And then there were, of course, some important but narrow issues left. But that was the big one for us.
I just want to know, I think one of the things that struck me throughout is there was definitely a will to make this happen, right? A will on the part of legislative leadership, a will on the part of the governor, the will on the part of the religious community and the LGBTQ community. And sometimes, Cliff and I have talked a little bit about this, the words weren't so much as important, right, as coming together. And so kind of working on that language, I think became a little bit of a difficult feat, but the point was, and the instructions clearly were, make this work, right? Make this happen. And you can all worry about the legalities of it. We want to make sure that it gets there. You've all talked a lot about trust. You've talked a lot about these obstacles that you've overcome. I want to shift a little bit. These are big issues. And as Cliff gave us a little bit of historical overview, and as did President Adams and the governor, of where we were at the time. What lessons did you learn through this process that maybe we should be taking today in light of some of the polarization of some other very large issues? Just in general, I mean, you've also all referenced that, the inability of Congress to get some things done and people just to retreat to their corners, and it's us versus them. And we can't find this common ground. Really, from this experience, what would be your advice, right? How do we find that common ground?
Jacey, you said it right when you talked about the will. There's first got to be a willingness to find a solution, a willingness to do what it takes, and however long it takes, and however protracted that negotiation is, until we get to the place that we all feel good about. That's hard work. Not everybody's willing to roll up their sleeves and work that hard. We have people that will say to us, well, why should I help them? They're the other side. They're the opposition. We see that in Washington, D.C. so often now, Well, I'm not going to help the Republicans. And the Republicans, I'm not going to help the Democrats. And it's so polarizing. So if we're going to solve problems, particularly this kind of magnitude and emotion, then there's got to be at least a willingness to say, I'm going to do my part to see what we can do to solve the problem, a willingness to engage, a willingness to listen, willingness to understand, a willingness to dialogue. I know people ask me many times what my philosophy was as governor, and I can tell you it was pretty simple. I'm a right of center conservative, but I'm moderate in tone and I'm inclusive in process. And I think that actually works for everybody. You can be a left of center Democrat, but moderate in tone and inclusive in process. And if we all have that attitude, we will come together and we will find solutions to whatever ails us. And so again, I can tell you as we learn, the willingness to engage has got to be at the top of the list. Some people aren't. And almost like compromise. Oh heavens, that's a dirty word. We're giving up our principles, we're giving up our values. And yet we found in the very beginning of our country, the founding fathers compromised and created the best document ever created for government by man in the history of the world. So if we use them, and many on the right do, well, the founding fathers, well, they learned how to work together, dialogue, understand, and a willingness to solve the problem and compromise. And we've done that better in Utah than probably any other state. In fact, U.S. Chamber of Commerce named us the #1 enterprising state not too long ago. And I know Derek will remember this. I think it was when he was chief of staff. And it said, they found in analyzing all the 50 states, named us #1, they said one of the reasons was the ability, the spirit of compromise and collaboration was found in greater abundance than any other state in America today. That's a great quality we have in Utah, part of the Utah way. And that's really what we've learned and reinforced as far as how we solve problems here in Utah.
Thank you, Governor. President Adams, I want to bring this one to you too. You mentioned earlier the ability to not give up values or beliefs, but to protect everyone's. What lessons have you taken from this process, again, that you continue to apply or that you would advise others tackling these big issues that seem so divisive?
Well, I think if we looked at definitely combine the two together, Senate Bill 296 and 297, there are points in every one of those pieces of legislation, or both those pieces of legislation, that some people love. But I'll guarantee you that though they're the same group doesn't necessarily care for some other parts of it. And everybody, no one got everything they wanted through the process, but everybody got the essential protections they needed. And again, to be able to look beyond perhaps and not make perfect the enemy of good, to be able to find something, as the governor just talked about, that's workable. And when you want to protect when you're trying to protect your own rights, that's a great event. But trying to protect everyone's rights, I think, has a more holistic approach. Now, when I was in 2004, back when I was first in the legislature, when we were together in 2004, I really, really thought and believed and that we were protecting our deep-seated religious beliefs. And, as I went through this process and through 296 and 297, and I can tell you that those on this webinar and others are very close friends, people I really didn't know very well until 2015. But as I read the New Testament and I listen to the advice that we're giving, that we ought to love our neighbor, that we ought to maybe turn the other cheek, that maybe we ought to do good to those that maybe hate us. As a Christian, and as someone who believes in service and those Christian principles, I really believe that in 2015, I wasn't defending my deep-seated religious beliefs. I was actually living those. And in reaching out and to try to help other people is what I think we ought to do as elected officials and as society. And that trust that was talking about is part of it. I think that's what made that work.
Thank you, President Adams. Cliff, Troy, can I throw that over to you?
Sure. I think the thing that I really learned, and it took a while to learn it, was I just didn't know how much fun it would be and how good it would feel and what it would mean to the community. I was being a lawyer, I was doing the word thing and the negotiation thing. And I had no idea what it would lead to in terms of these friendships with the people here that I value so much. And that we would continue to do work together more than this. Just a couple of years later, we started off by filing a lawsuit challenging one of the last anti-gay laws in the state of Utah. And I got a call. I remember I was on vacation in Florida, seeing my family, and President Adams called, and he was going to run a bill on sex education, which was what our lawsuit was about. I'm a little nervous about that phone call. I didn't know what his bill would do. And he said, well, I was gonna strike out the anti-gay language. And I thought, really? and we did it, and it passed. I testified alongside Gail Rosika, the president of Utah's Eagle Forum, who created that law. We both testified in support of repealing it together. And both chambers passed it. They were one vote short of unanimous in each chamber. It was just incredible. Conversion therapy, hate crimes, anti-bullying. We've done a lot of great work together, and it's been a lot of fun. Always challenging, but always fun. And I didn't see that coming. I was focused on the narrow goals provided to me by my client.
I think we all recognize that's one of the reasons, and fun, I think, is the right word, why working on policy in the state of Utah is so rewarding, is folks really are willing to work on issues in a sincere way, and you see the results. Troy, how about you?
Yeah, it's all been exhilarating and frightening and exciting, everything. What I learned, and it took me a few years to learn, is to let my defenses down, sometimes we have a posture that the other side is our enemy. And Governor Herbert mentioned this, we've got to actually take that leap of faith and actually see, yeah, we come from different perspectives, different ideologies, but that doesn't mean that you're my enemy. And right now, everything in our culture, social media algorithms, partisan cable news, is teaching us to have contempt for the other side. And when you approach someone on the other side as your enemy, you can't get anywhere. You can't get any movement forward. And I am so grateful that Utah was the first state in the country to ever pass a pro-LGBT bill through a Republican-controlled legislature. I brag about that all the time. And in Governor Herbert, you may not know this, but when I speak and lecture around the country on this issue, I praise you all the time, and people are always looking at me like, really, he's pretty conservative, isn't he? And I'm like, yes, he is, but he may go down in the history of the state is signing the most pro-LGBT bills of any governor ever. so I love bragging about that, the fact that we could come together. I love to tell people that President Adams is our friend, because a lot of people in our community are a bit suspicious of government, a bit suspicious. And so being able to put your defenses down, drop your shields, and actually love people on the other side of the aisle is something, and I'm still practicing, still working to perfect. But that's the only way we can really move things forward in a healthy, democratic manner.
I want to shift our discussion just a little bit. So as we started talking about some of the obstacles in the landscape, but everyone kind of refers to this great moment at the end. And I think when everyone's referring to it, we had this fantastic bill signing that was really the first of its kind in the state of Utah. And I'm going to put up the picture here in a second. We've all seen this picture, and I know, Troy, you all use this all the time. Governor, I know you had it in your office. This is something that people are so proud of. I want to talk a little bit about this bill signing and what this event meant, not just to this bill, but meant to the state and meant to communities and meant to people across the board. Governor, I'm going to go to you first, and I'm not meaning to cross anyone out here, but I am going to pull up the picture while you're talking.
Okay. Well, again, Troy said it well, because it was an example of Utah getting an important issue resolved, not perfectly, but resolved, and having us get something done, to the surprise and wonderment of many. How did they do that in Utah? Look at that great picture. Have we gathered that day? I think it was the last day of the session, President, that we got together there and had this signing ceremony. And everybody was just euphoric in attendance, and it was a great day, an example of Utah getting things done. And we did do it the Utah way. But we did bring people around the table. We did have a willingness to solve the problem. And we had people from all sides engage in the debate, the discussion, and came up with something that we think is pretty darn good. And by the way, and I think Cliff mentioned this earlier, this has led to other opportunities for us to do the same thing, whether it be conversion therapy, other issues regarding the gay community, other issues out there that have nothing to do with your sexual orientation, but just knotty problems that we're able to come together, have people sit around the table, discuss the pros and cons, and come together and find common ground and compromise and get good pieces of legislation passed. That's one of the secrets of Utah's success, that ability to cooperate and collaborate to get a result done. So Utah, again, I know I won't put it necessarily in the magnitude of the Olympics when we hosted the world, but this is, again, a significant example of Utah excelling. And that's not gone unnoticed by many people around the country, around the world, and certainly the business community around the country that's saying, Utah is a great place to live and to raise children, and a great place to do business. It's one of our fortes. And so, again, this is really a catalyst to, in fact, help Utah become better known and better appreciated around the country, around the world.
I'll let any of you go next. What did this particular event?
Well, for me, what's so significant, and I think Jim DeBackus is there blocking me, so you can't see me in the photo. Typical Senator DeBackus.
Yeah.
But for me, there we go. Well, for me, what was so powerful in this moment is the first time in our history when LGBT people were woven into the legal fabric of our state. And it felt like, for the first time, and I've lived here for 20 years, this was the first time where I really felt like Utah was my home, that I belonged here, that I wasn't, pushed aside, but I was actually integrated and included within this beautiful body. We call this the People's House. And it was the very first time I think that a lot of LGBTQ Utahns really felt that the People's House also belonged to us. So this is an aspirational moment to me. I keep this, I have this framed in my office as well. When things get really tough and get really difficult, I look at this photo and I think about, we can accomplish the impossible. We can do what everybody tells us is too hard, too tough. That'll never happen in Utah. And I look at this photo and I go, yes, we can.
President Adams, how about you?
Yeah, you have to look at the photo, look at the diversity in it. You see a member of the Quorum of the 12, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. You see people in Catholic Diocese. You see some of the most conservative legislators in the legislature. You see Family Action Council. You see some of the most conservative activist groups. And then you see some of the most liberal legislators in the state. And you see them standing side by side along with Equality Utah. You see your chair there. You see Troy. You see Cliff. I know you're all there. You see the total spectrum of the state of Utah in this one picture. And if you can't understand the significance of that, then there's something wrong with you as you look to see what happened through a great effort. By the way, I think I'm there. I think I'm totally worn out, Troy. I think you've just, but on the last day of the session, but to see the people side by side in one room, and everyone is smiling, everyone is happy with the accomplishments. Everyone got, again, one more time, everyone received benefit, and no one, it's just a great event. And the picture, I think, depicts it all. And you could go to some of those other screenshots, but It's pretty amazing to see people standing side by side, celebrating an accomplishment that is so significant in the state of Utah. So yeah, it's a big deal.
Cliff, I want you to talk about this picture.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, to see the leadership of both parties welcome the LGBT community into the Capitol is an astonishing thing. And I wanted to be a part of that. I'd worked very hard to get to that finish line. I had my first daughter 9 months earlier, and had been working pretty much around the clock for Equality Utah since then. We hired Troy during that period, and then we got this done. And I had not seen much of her, and that was very difficult for me. I had not slept much in the previous month before this photo, like everyone else on this call. And I actually brought her with me. Her name's Evelyn. And if you look very closely between Governor Herbert and President Adams, right between their two shoulders, there's a very tiny face. And that's Evelyn Jane Rosky. She had not been she was fascinated by all the people, but wasn't real interested in the bill signing until Governor Herbert picked up the law that had just become a law, and everyone looked at it, and she popped her head over President Adams' shoulder and said, what's that yellow thing over there? And I hang this in my office, and I show it to her on a regular. She's now 7 years old, just turned 7 this weekend, and very meaningful moment.
I'm going to sit there. You can see her a little more closely here in this picture in the upper right hand corner there. Focusing. I just want to add a couple of things for this. For those who were involved in this picture tells so many stories and encapsulates so many things. And, as President Adams mentioned, you've got apostles from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints there. You have people standing next to people that were unusual or continuing conversations of different things that were going on. I have to confess and share this story, and I've shared this with most of the people on this panel. Mike Maurer, who you can see here in this picture, who worked for Governor Herbert, had suggested we do this. And this was unusual. We'd not done a bill signing like this ever that I can recall. And as the boring lawyer in the room, I'm like, no, we don't have time for this, right? Like, it's the last day of the session. This is a fantastic bill. It will speak for itself. We don't need to have this big spectacle. We don't need to do this, right? We've got a lot to get done. I said no. Gratefully, I was overruled by everyone there, because I look back at this moment and these pictures. I also have this picture in my office as one of the greatest symbolic and meaningful events that I had the opportunity to participate in. And it wasn't as important as the law was, and the law was incredibly important. This event symbolized that ability for people to work together and to come together. And in fact, I have to share with you all, this is a little bit sappy here, but I just got a text message, Governor Herbert, from one of your staff who's participating, and said, if you can work this in. She was standing in the crowd, and just so everyone knows, the whole rotunda was full of people. This is, one picture there, but said she was standing next to a friend who was gay, who was in the rotunda, and said, I've lived in Utah for 25 years, and this is the first time I felt like I really belong. Can you introduce me to the governor? I'd like to thank him. This bill, President Adams and all those who participated in it in this moment, I think really did that a lot for the people of Utah, made this much more home and a much more, made this place feel much more welcoming. Anyone else have anything they want to add? Again, I said there's so many stories told in this picture.
I'll just add one, and I know we're running out of time, but again, we had copies made. A lot of people were given copies that helped work on this important piece of legislation. But I saw in the front row, I don't think you show in the picture here, a longtime friend of mine, Gary and Millie Watts. And they've been strong advocates for the LGBTQ community. They have children that are gay and just been involved in so many different ways. And I know they felt frustration along the pathway. It talks to their perseverance and their willingness to keep working and plugging away. But I gave one of the signing pencils. I walked down in the front there and went over to Gary and Millie and gave them one of the signing pens we had there as a souvenir. And they were very pleased and happy. For them, it was a culmination of many years of work. And I think that's the truth for many people that were there today at that occasion. the culmination of many years of work, hope, and prayer to get to a point where we all feel included and our rights respected. So that was really a little side note for me that I think about on that occasion.
Governor.
Jacey, I might just say something, and I probably can't help myself because I'm in the legislature, but I just want to repeat again. I mean, we have different processes in America. We have obviously, again, you can take it to the judicial branch or otherwise, but I think sometimes we know we have the rights to vote. We know we have the rights as a legislator to legislate. But whether you're a citizen and have the right to vote, or whether you're a legislator, have the right to legislate, I believe there's an obligation. And that's something that came so clearly to me, is this is not an issue that maybe that I felt like was something that I was passionate about, but we have an obligation to stand up, no matter who you are, and get involved in the issue. And by getting involved, I believe the legislative process is far superior as far as setting policy to any other process. And as looking forward, we've got opportunities to continue to get involved and to be part of that great process. And if we are, and if we do, and if we don't take it just as a right, but more of as an obligation, and take the effort to get involved, we'll have other great moments like this. But I love the legislative process, and I'm very honored to be part of it.
Well, we are sadly at the end of our time, but I just want to highlight these. When the chamber was discussing doing a Pride webinar for this month, this seemed like the natural choice to look back at these kinds of things that not only that just represent the state, and it's why Utah is such a great place for all of us, why we all want to be here, why our businesses want to be here, but why they're also able to succeed. So I would just want to extend sincere gratitude to each of you for your role in not only this bill, but in making Utah such a great place. This is, I think, is such a great example of how we really, how Utah, the Utah way, right? As we say somewhat tritely, but it really does matter, and this personifies that. So thank you to each of you, Governor Herbert, President Adams, Cliff, Troy, thank you for being with us. And thank you to all of those who are not on our webinar, but who also participated.
And thank you, JC, for all the good work you did. You're right in the middle of it. Couldn't have done it without you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Happy Pride.
Adios, amigos.
Happy Pride.
All right.